Snow fell like ash from a dying fire on the night she knocked. The frontier wind howled across the plains, carrying the sound of desperation with it, and the wooden cabin at the edge of the Wild West settlement stood silent, dark except for the warm glow of a single lantern hanging beside the door, a Christmas wreath nailed crookedly above it, an almost forgotten symbol of hope in a land that had little mercy. The widow stood there barefoot, her feet numb and cracked from days of walking, her breath shallow, her body bruised by both men and fate. She carried a sleeping infant tied tightly against her chest, its tiny breath the only rhythm keeping her upright. On her back hung a torn pack filled with nothing but memories, and in her trembling hand she clutched a small red cloth bundle, her last coin, her last pride, her last prayer. Beside her stood two children, thin as fence posts, the boy's eyes hardened too early by hunger and death, the little girl gripping her mother's hand as if the world would swallow her whole if she let go. When the widow raised her hand and knocked, it was not loud, not confident. It was the knock of someone who had already been turned away too many times. Inside the cabin, Caleb Harlan stood frozen, a widowed father himself. His heart had been buried 2 winters ago alongside his wife beneath frozen dirt. He lived by rules now, hard rules carved from loss. No strangers, no charity, no weakness. The West punished softness, and he had children of his own to protect. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking like a warning. His face was stern, shadowed beneath a black hat, eyes sharp as gunmetal. He took in the sight before him, the woman's wounds, the children's hollow faces, the infant barely wrapped against the cold, and something in his chest stirred, something he had chained up since the day his wife died. Still, his arms crossed instinctively, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, voice rough as gravel. The widow tried to speak, but her voice broke. Instead, she held out the red bundle, opening it to reveal a single coin. "I don't want charity," she whispered. "I just need one night. I'll work. I'll leave at dawn." Snow gathered on her hair, on the baby's blanket, on the dreams she no longer allowed herself to have. Caleb looked at the coin, then at the children. His mind screamed no, memories of betrayal, of thieves and bloodshed, of burying his wife alone while the town looked away. He thought of his own children asleep inside, the promise he had made at her grave to never risk them again, and yet Christmas Eve pressed against his soul like a loaded gun. He remembered another knock long ago, when his wife had begged a neighbor for help during childbirth, and the door had stayed shut. Silence had killed her as surely as any bullet. The wind howled harder. The baby whimpered. The little girl stumbled, weak. Caleb stepped aside. "One night," he said finally. "That's all." The widow collapsed too, her knees in gratitude before he could stop her. He ushered them in quickly, bolting the door behind them as if fear itself might follow. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them, and for the first time in weeks, the children felt heat that wasn't pain. Caleb's children emerged from the back room, eyes wide. No words were spoken, but something sacred settled into the cabin that night, a fragile peace forged from shared suffering. Outside, snow erased footprints, but inside, something far deeper than shelter was being offered. That night, under a roof built from grief, strangers became witnesses to a moment that would ripple far beyond the walls of that lonely cabin. And if this story has already touched your heart, remember, stories like this live because of you. Subscribe to the channel and keep these forgotten Wild West legends alive. Christmas morning did not arrive with church bells or laughter in the Wild West. It crept in quietly, pale light slipping through the frost-bitten window as if unsure it was welcome in a land so accustomed to sorrow, and Eleanor awoke in fear before hope could touch her, her body tense, her mind racing, ready for rejection even before it came, instinct telling her to gather her children and vanish before the kindness of the night turned into the cruelty of day, because in her experience mercy never lasted past sunrise, but when she rose she smelled warm bread, real bread, not the memory of it, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Yet the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of her children grounded her in a reality she no longer trusted. And there stood Caleb Harlan, widowed father, shoulders heavy with responsibility, hands rough from years of survival, silently cooking as though feeding strangers was the most natural thing in the world, though inside him a storm raged because letting them stay had broken every rule. He'd sworn by since burying his wife in frozen ground while the Same town that now slept peacefully behind closed doors had turned its back on him, and Eleanor watched him carefully, expecting anger or regret, but saw only exhaustion mixed with something fragile and dangerous: compassion. They ate without ceremony, children too hungry for words. And when Eleanor finally spoke her story, it came out in broken pieces like a wagon wheel shattered by gunfire, telling of her husband who had refused to kneel to raiders, who had believed honesty still had a place in the West, and who had paid for that belief with his life while she watched helplessly. The town too afraid to help, the law too distant to care. Doors closing one by one until she was no longer a neighbor but a burden. And Caleb listened with his jaw clenched tight because her story echoed his own, too closely. The same silence, the same abandonment, the same realization that survival in the wild West often meant choosing who you let die. And as the day stretched on, hoofbeats thundered in the distance, a sound that froze blood.